Hello all, I'm Kel Kidman, and welcome to Breaking on the Daily, where today we are going to begin with Trump lawyers' counter-argument to the impeachment, which has just recently been released, and it's about what you'd expect to see from this sort of counter-argument. It's exactly what everyone expected to see. Trump arguing that the impeachment process at this point is unconstitutional because he isn't president, arguing that he did not incite violence because there is nothing in his speech to evidence that is such a thing. The inevitable counter-argument to the one quote they actually did have, where he said, "We need to fight for our beliefs," where he just says, well, that's not actually incitement to violence. It isn't even necessarily a reference to violence, or isn't a reference to violence at all, because he simply means to fight in the figurative sense rather than the literal one. You know, it's par for the course. It's exactly what you'd expect. And I kind of want to come back to what the impeachment is, because this is really just a vindictive example of just how far the Democrats will go to divide the country. At the same time, they will continue to claim to be the uniters. And this all falls under a rubric that I laid out yesterday with regard to the other side of the monoparty, the GOP establishment, where the GOP establishment and the Democrat establishment are both after fundamentally the same thing. That being, they want the agreed upon lie. They want everyone to believe fundamentally the exact same thing about the country, and they do not care what that is, whether it is truthful or a lie, so long as everyone believes it and it benefits them in some way. Of course, they have their neoliberal sorts of globalist tendencies, that sort of thing. And so it has that sort of tinge where they want us to believe those sorts of things about the world. But they don't really care about the truth or falsity. They simply care that people are united around, preferably them. And that's why they're so against division, or at least the acknowledgement of division. Because importantly, I am not pro-division. I am not sitting here talking to you all about all of the sorts of divisions that exist in the country. I am not maligning leftists about how terrible their ideology is because I inherently wish for division. No, I simply do not wish to lie about what divisions do and do not exist. My division with many people on the left on the issue of, say, communism is something that does in fact exist. It is something that has existed for the past century. But up until just recently, almost no one was willing to acknowledge it. And that's why I find the rhetoric going around about how many lies are going on around the internet and all that sort of stuff to be somewhat inaccurate. And why I see the limitations of the increase of echo chambers to be equally ridiculous. The reason being is that both of these tendencies already existed. Echo chambers, if anything, were worse in the past because you didn't even have access to countervailing information. You only had access to what the local news would tell you, and if the local news did not tell you certain things, well, you just wouldn't hear about it, or you wouldn't hear about it in all likelihood unless you were somehow connected in some other way and had some other information gathering mechanism. Nowadays with the internet, you have so much information. Yes, that includes a lot of lies, but it also includes things and truths which go around the legacy media stalwart. It goes around that monolith and prevents it from being blocked out by such. And so what has happened in the interim, and what is personified, I think, this beginning of this century, is actually a era of great honesty in a lot of ways. Because what has occurred is that many people have been much more honest about the divisions that lie between them and their fellows than has ever been the case in the past. And this is very healthy. As I've spoken of before, if you ignore divisions, if you pretend the divisions that do exist don't, and pretend that everyone is unified around everything, what ends up happening, rather than actually getting rid of the divisions in any real respect, what ends up happening is the pressure is bottled. It then builds up and builds up and builds up until it bursts. And when it bursts, It's much worse than if you had simply let it out in the beginning. I am not pro something like a civil war or a revolution, but to see people purposely go down that path by ignoring the divisions that exist and attempting to limit the spread of the acknowledgement of such divisions is utterly ridiculous to me. I am similarly not pro something like balkanization or anything like that, for the exact same reason. For the reason that I don't want the U.S. to be weakened by any measured respect. I do not wish to see the U.S. be weakened on the world stage, because I believe that the U.S. is an important force on the world stage, and I would prefer China not to take that spot. And that's what I think this impeachment represents. To go back to it, it represents the Democrats playing out the division that does exist and that deep in their heart of hearts they acknowledge exists, without ever wanting to acknowledge that Trump wasn't the one who created it. Trump has nothing to do with the divisions that exist in America. Such divisions don't get created in 4 years. I fail to see, and something that has baffled me, is seeing people say, we've become so much more divided over the past 4 years. Where I don't really see it that way. I see it as we have simply become more honest about the divisions that do exist over the past 4 years. Rather than becoming more divided, we have simply revealed what our preferences are. We have revealed the divisions that we have, the differences between us, the groups of people in this country. I believe that's what happened, and I think this is another exemplary of it. And to move on to our next story, this is a good first step from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is wishing to penalize big tech companies for unlawful practices, particularly the collection of certain user data and the banning of politicians' accounts during an election season. Now, the reason why I say this is a good first step is because, in all likelihood, this is about all that a state government can actually do. In terms of what the penalties are for these things, it's essentially just fines. If a politician running in a Florida election gets banned off of Twitter or any sort of public platform like a Facebook, Twitter, and the like, then Florida will fine that company $100,000, I think, a day, every day, until the account is restored. And this is, in fact, a good first step because it unsilences the politicians. One of the most egregious things, and everyone, I think, has agreed with this, that happened over the past few months, or just a month, was actually the banning of Donald Trump while he was still president. It was an utterly absurd thing with no basis in reality. And what has happened is everyone in the government has freaked out because of this. And it is reasoned to see that they are freaking out because of this, because people in government are now shown to not have the power to keep themselves onto these supposed public platforms. These supposed platforms. And this is not where it should end. But I do think this is a good first step. And if you don't live in Florida, I suggest that you go to your state house and you go to your governor and you say, hey, apply something similar to this in our state because I want that to happen. Now, I don't think that the state governments can go all the way because I think managing bannings of particular individuals that are not state politicians running in state races, I don't think that would fall under the purview of a state. And I suspect as such because they didn't even try to put that up. Though it may just be mealy-mouthed nonsense, and they might just be, kind of chickening out on that. But I don't even think it's really worth trying. What needs to happen, and I think this is an encouraging thing, is because this isn't the only development on the big tech stage that has happened over the past few days. Because, for those who have been living under a rock, Steven Crowder is now suing Facebook for censorship, and is attempting, essentially, to change the interpretation of 230 with this lawsuit. And that's a good thing to start with. That's a good thing to do as well. And I think that's more of the end game of where we want to be. Because 230. Well, it would be good to reform it to make the language more clear because it is a really vague bill, and that's in large respect the reason why it could be interpreted so broadly over the past few decades. It's not inherently terrible in that the idea of what it's trying to do isn't a bad one. Because before the idea of Section 230, you couldn't moderate your content on your platform, period. And so even things like off-topic, things which are off-topic. So say you're on a subreddit, and you're on a subreddit for, gaming, and then you just started talking up politics in the threads. Right now, you can be banned for that. You can be taken off of that website because of the moderators, because it's off topic. And that's a fair thing. I think that is a fair thing, because if your board isn't about politics, I don't see why you should have to allow politics. If you of any color. If your board is about, some particular thing, even if it's about a particular ideology and discussion of those within that ideology, I don't see why you necessarily have to support all of the other sorts of political ideologies, because those would be considered off topic. That's totally fair. And the same goes with things like obscenities, because anything that was considered free speech could not even be banned by the platforms. Period. So you couldn't have a space that was free from, say, pornography, any other sort of illicit material, which, is kind of silly. 230 was there to solve a real problem, and it is somewhat adequate at that. Of course, it is too vague in that it allows platforms that are supposedly, ostensibly, neutral, more broad platforms that don't have any particular topic that they are based around, something like a Twitter or a Facebook or a YouTube, and has allowed them to ban content while pretending to be a neutral platform that does not have any particular topic. It has allowed them to ban content at will based on their terms of service. And that it has been allowed that partially through an extremely broad, almost nonsensical judicial interpretation of the statute, and also through the statute itself by being extremely vague and having room for that interpretation in the first place. And that's what really needs to be fixed. It's not an inherently bad section of the code right now. It just has problems like every section of the code. It's just that these problems are much bigger and need to be dealt with much more swiftly than a whole lot of other problems that we can also point to in U.S. statutes. And this Florida update is, in fact, a good first step towards that goal. And, I think I'm going to move on from that next onto another story where the Democrats really are showing that they just do not actually care about the unity stuff or being bipartisan in any real measure. Of course, they care about being bipartisan in the monoparty sense of everyone agreeing with the left on pretty much everything, the globalists and that sort of stuff, going with the neoliberal hegemony. Of course, they're bipartisan and unity-seeking in that sense, but they aren't unity-seeking in any substantial and real sense. They are about as unity-seeking as I am. Just they're not hiding it. They're hiding the ball, whereas I will just say what I think. Because Democrats have advanced a key budget measure, paving the way to pass a COVID-19 deal without the GOP. This includes the stuff like the $1,400 checks, which I get to laugh at the Joe Biden voters for really believing he was going to do $2,000. And the thing that I'm more concerned about, the state and local government bailouts. And I don't like bailouts as a general rule because bailouts are a bad idea. They lead to particular advantages in competition, and they generally only support the big players. They don't really support the small players. And in this case, you're bailing out a lot of states that really should have a much bigger advantage than they seem to. You could take a state like California or any other, or New Jersey, or other states that are insolvent and don't work, but are the economic centers of America. It's really quite funny to see that sort of thing. Because liberals will claim, oh no, California's run like a dream. Look at how much economics they have. When the fact of the matter is, the reason that California has so much has so much of an economic base, has so much GDP, has nothing to do with their policies. And it has to do with the fact that, one, it was already there before they were run like the worst state in the country. And two, it has to do with the fact that they have all the rich people and also have all the poor people. It's the fact that their social strata are so monumentally different. All right, they have Jeff Bezos and they have Joe on the street panning for coins, getting like $1 a day. All right, you have these huge extremes, and so the median is going to be extremely skewed, or the mean is going to be extremely skewed towards that top level, despite the fact that that doesn't actually represent the common person in the state. All right, that's just how that is functioning. It's quite funny to see that sort of thing from the leftists. But they are still running so terribly, even with all of these advantages and super high taxes and all that sort of stuff. They're still running in an insolvent manner. They don't actually function as states. California, New Jersey, and New Jersey in particular, because New Jersey run awfully, is essentially bankrupt. These states are in danger of becoming bankrupt. New Jersey especially, but California and other states as well are running super close to that level. They are getting extremely close, especially after the last year, where they have been some of the most draconian lockdown states. The most insistently locked down states, despite all of the evidence to the contrary, the fact that the WHO doesn't even recommend them anymore, and the fact that the CDC also doesn't recommend them, essentially saying they're really bad. Even if you were to use them as a last resort, it's going to cause a whole lot of problems that have nothing to do with the pandemic and have everything to do with your response. Despite all that, they're still doing it. It's utterly insane, and it shows just how incompetent their governance is. But they're going to be bailed out, and they're going to be bailed out by the Democratic Congress because, well, people voted for it. Frankly, that's the fact of the matter. People voted for it. You could argue, all sorts of nonsense was going on, but there was a substantial portion of the country, even if all of the assumptions and all of the things I do in fact believe in, all of the irregularities that was going on in the election, even with all of that stuff, there was still a substantial portion of the country, and this is something that should not be missed. There was still a substantial portion of the country that was voting for this. There is still a substantial portion of the country, millions of people in the country, tens of millions of people in the country, who were voting for Joe Biden. There were tens of millions of people voting for the Democrats. Those people still exist, and they voted for this. Don't let them get away with it. Don't try to, and this is the most frustrating, and one of the most frustrating things I have witnessed in my time watching and commentating on politics, and that is how many apologetics there are for the American people. Because, man, Congress's approval rating is not like 15%. It's super low. I wonder who voted these guys into office. I wonder who is in charge. I wonder who could have prevented this from happening. Who could have raised the approval rating and helped with that? Oh yeah, it's the American people, but they don't ever do it. Because many people in the American people are frankly just apathetic. Don't care about these sorts of things, at least not every time it's not directly affecting their wallet. And they can't see it immediately. And even then, when that happens, they don't actually vote for anything that's going to actually fix the problem. They just vote for whatever the other guy was, regardless of whether that was ever going to fix the problem or who was actually at fault. They just want to get rid of the guy in charge and go to the next guy. That's what they want to do whenever they see panic. That's the American people. That's a large respect of the American people. That's a large aspect of the American people. And don't apologize for that, because we as people, and this includes a lot of us, we need to be better. We need to be more focused on, say, local politics. We need to be paying attention to our state houses, to our local city council, to all of those sorts of things, which are things that we did not do. And for those on the right who think you're going to get off on this, in terms of the election irregularities, in terms of the illegal practices that were going on within the governorships and all that sort of stuff, you're just as at fault as anyone else. Maybe even more, because you weren't paying attention to local politics. If you're living in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, or any of those states that were having problems, you're at fault for not keeping your senators, keeping your state houses to account, not keeping your governors, your AGs to account. Because that's something you can actually do. These people who are in the state houses are much more amenable to the actual people of the state than the federal house is. But we were all way too focused on the national stuff. We were all laser-eyed focused on what the national things were. That's what was happening over the past year. It is something I have realized, and something that I am constantly attempting to rectify even within myself, because I had this problem. Everyone had this problem, okay? And it really needs to be fixed. To move on to our next and last story, China is now being suspected in a hack of the U.S. Federal Payroll Agency using the SolarWind exploit. Remember that thing? Yeah, kind of went away for a bit there. But this is coming from an FBI source. It's a leaked information, so take it with a grain of salt, of course. This isn't necessarily accurate, but it shouldn't be surprising. I would be much more surprised to see if China didn't use the SolarWind exploit to hack anything. But, so this is somewhat credible, because I would expect this sort of thing to happen, though the details may be wrong, and, this may be false. Once again, may be false. It's an anonymous FBI source. We do not know what's happening. This is a leak. We don't know if this is real, just to be clear, so I'm completely consistent. But, assuming this is real, assuming, beyond all that, assuming this is real, I'm going to wait on Joe Biden and see what his response is. I wonder who Beijing Biden's going to stump for. I wonder what he's going to do over the next few days. It will be really telling to see where the next few years are going to go, depending on how this sort of thing is responded to, especially if this is accurate. Assuming this is accurate, I don't know it's accurate, all right? We don't know it's accurate, just to be clear. But I think that's where I'm going to leave you today. And wherever you're watching me, do, in fact, subscribe. And if you're on YouTube, go literally anywhere else. Go to BitChute. Go somewhere else. go somewhere else and subscribe, all right? Because, I'm going to be posting a whole lot more. And BitChute, I'm planning on having something go up on Saturday as well. An extra thing that's going to be BitChute exclusive. And this is where I'm going to leave you guys today. I'm Kel Kidman. This has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.